Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our February Cabinet meeting. I'm pleased to see so many people joining us here today for this meeting. Thank you all for your attendance. So item number 1 on our agenda today is apologies. I don't believe we've received any apologies. No, thank you. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Item number 3 are the minutes from our January 2023 Cabinet. These are on pages 3 to 10 of your packs. Is somebody content to move these as a true record?
Happy to move, Leader.
Second. Everyone in favour? Thank you very much for that. We'll move on to item number 4 on our agenda today, which is the Capital Strategy and Treasury Management Strategy. And this can be found on pages 11 to 72 of the packs that you have. And I'm sure that you've all had an opportunity to go through these packs. Now, this first report is the Capital and Treasury Management Strategy for 2023-24. It's an annual report focusing on the Council's capital expenditure plans, the financial impact of those in terms of borrowing, and our investment strategy for the year. It's important to note that full Council ultimately approved the borrowing limits and prudential indicators contained within the report. However, we as Cabinet are requested to approve the detailed capital programme itself. It's also important to note the Governance and Audit Committee have also considered the report in their most recent meeting and have provided comments. In this case, their comments simply endorsed the proposed strategies with no concerns raised. Now, in terms of the report itself, there's a couple of key points that I'd like to draw to Cabinet's attention. The first is that we are entering a new capital programme window, with the current programme ending in March of this year, and a new 5-year programme will be taking effect from April. In the past, the programme's been reviewed once every 5 years. However, the proposal is to move to a rolling approach to capital programme management, meaning that the overall programme and borrowing affordability will be reviewed on an annual basis. This change will introduce more flexibility in managing the programme and is accompanied by strengthened governance arrangements, which are detailed in the report. Because of the extremely challenging financial context that we're working within, the proposed programme contains only ongoing and previously approved schemes, which are being carried forward from the existing programme, and annual sums which include activities such as annual asset maintenance and fleet renewal. Although there are no new schemes being included, the programme, especially in years 1 and 2, is still significant and contains a number of the Cabinet's high priority schemes. Now, because of the affordability challenges, there's no new borrowing headroom included in the strategy, meaning that capital headroom is limited. As a result, every opportunity will need to be taken to boost the headroom via one-off resources so that we can continue to respond to emerging pressures as and when they arise. Although there's no new borrowing included in this programme, previously approved borrowing will be incurred over the next few years, and this will increase the overall capital financing requirement and the Council's level of debt. The borrowing limits proposed in the report take account of this, and the revenue consequence of additional borrowing is already budgeted for, following a budget announcement made in 2021-22. Therefore, colleagues, the programme proposed is affordable, prudent and sustainable. In terms of Treasury management, the report details the Council's approach to borrowing and investing. It confirms that the Council will still pursue an internal borrowing strategy by using available cash resources to defer external borrowing for as long as possible, and will only undertake borrowing in advance of need where there is a clear financial rationale for doing so. For investing, the Council will continue to prioritise security, liquidity and yield in that order, and will strike an appropriate balance between risk and return. A minimum investment balance of £10 million is required, and longer-term investments, often with a higher return, will continue to be explored. So at that point, colleagues, I'd just like to pause for any comments. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Leader. I particularly wanted to welcome the new capital strategy and I appreciate it's a 10-year context. However, the very point that is going to be made is going to be an annual review, I think is wise and sensible, given, I think, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen so much change and so much churn in relation to finances, in relation to what happened. The pandemic was a massive lesson to us. So an annual review in relation to our strategy programme is a good way forward. I really appreciated also that it's in line with our service objectives, which actually reflects our manifesto commitments, which is really important. I also welcome the fact that there's absolute intention that we be completing our Band B capital programme in relation to education. That's really good news. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much for that, Deputy Leader. Any further comments from colleagues with regard to this item? Okay. The Head of Finance commentary then, within the covering report, directly addresses the question of affordability, prudence and sustainability, and confirms that the proposed strategy and programme meet all of these criteria. On that basis then, colleagues, we as a Cabinet are asked to recommend to the full Council for approval the capital strategy for 2023-24 and the borrowing limits needed to deliver the proposed programme, and the Treasury Management Strategy and the prudential indicators included within it, the investment strategy and the MRP policy for 2023-24. We're also asked to approve the detailed capital programme set out in Appendix 1, which the Deputy Leader has just highlighted, and we're asked to note the increasing level of debt and its impact, and the Head of Finance's recommendations with regard to this. So is somebody content to move this? Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Everyone content with that? Thank you very much for that, colleagues. We'll move to item number 5 on our agenda today, the December Revenue Budget Monitor. This is in pages 73 to 96 of the packs. Now, as you'll recall, colleagues, this report is one of our regular updates. This is the Q3 revenue update being presented to Cabinet and explains the current forecast position of the authority as at December 2022. Now, the purpose of this report is to highlight the current forecast position on the Council's revenue budget and the financial risks and opportunities that present themselves. Against a net budget of £343 million, the December revenue position currently forecasts an underspend of £1.1 million, which represents less than 0.4% of variance against budget. This underspend is after the use of all revenue budget contingencies of £4.3 million included in the 2022-23 revenue budget, as agreed by us as Cabinet in February 2022. Despite having established these budget contingencies for the 22-23 year to deal with COVID legacy issues, there is significant overspending in some key demand areas and other emerging risks within service areas. These have been offset by savings against revenue budget contingencies which have been made available to the Council, the Council Tax Reduction Scheme and other non-service budgets as we see set out in our report. The forecast position has, colleagues, improved by £2.5 million since the last Cabinet, primarily from one-off grant funding that's been received from Welsh Government in respect of the elimination of profit funding for children's social care and no one left out approach funding to support homelessness. Whilst the additional grant funding is welcomed, we continue to be mindful of the key areas of overspending within service areas as set out in the report and its appendices. The key areas contributing to the £5 million forecast overspend within service areas include increased demand across key social service areas, including children's out of area and emergency placements. These two areas alone contribute an overspend of over £4 million to the overall service position. The impact of the 22-23 NJC pay award. The average increase for council staff will be in the region of 6.4%, compared to only 4% provision in the budget. This represents a forecast overspend of £2.4 million for non-school-based staff. Significant pressures are evident within housing and communities in relation to homelessness. An overspend of £1.9 million is forecast after the additional in-year grant funding that has been awarded. And the main issues are the large number of individuals and households accommodated in temporary accommodation, reflecting a continuation of the position from the COVID period. The lack of suitable accommodation options, resulting in significant use of hotel and B&B options at much higher costs than traditional options. And the cap on housing benefit subsidy, resulting in only a proportion of these costs being covered by the Department for Works and Pension. In addition to these continued risks, there are also issues that have emerged this year that will continue to be closely monitored. These include, but are not restricted to, education, special needs and SEN transport, which is forecasting a £496,000 overspend due to higher operator costs relating to inflation, and a £340,000 car parking income shortfall. The anticipated overspend in these areas of emerging financial risk is expected to be over £800,000 by the end of the financial year. And we are also aware that further pressures are evident within fleet maintenance as a product of rising fuel prices, as well as increasing costs associated with maintenance. We've got an anticipated shortfall against the delivery of 21-22 and prior year savings of £541,000, largely due to delays in progressing the necessary actions that are associated with that, and some of those do relate back to the pandemic. It is pleasing to note, though, that all undelivered savings are expected to be delivered in full next financial year or proposed to be dealt with as part of the draft budget. Underspending against both the core revenue contingency budget and the other temporary contingencies do provide mitigation against service area overspending. And the forecast underspend of £4.7 million is shown against non-service budgets. In addition to this, there is a forecast underspend of £2.3 million against capital financing, specifically on PFI interest, and almost £1 million forecast saving against the council tax reduction scheme budget. Turning to focus on our schools, schools are separately projected to overspend by £5.3 million, a proportion of which will have been planned, and this will reduce school reserves by that amount. As well as the impact of the higher pay award compared to the budget increase allowed for, schools are also drawing down on reserves built up over the previous 2 years as they move to catch up and strengthen provision after the impacts of COVID. Robust monitoring does need to be maintained in this area, as whilst no schools have set a deficit budget, there are a couple of schools that have entered an in-year deficit position following the impact of the pay award being reflected in individual school forecasts. Overall, the current position on schools' balances represents an improvement from concerns evident in previous financial years. It does, however, remain necessary to closely scrutinise each position and ensure that recovery plans are in place and being delivered as intended to avoid a return to the previous position. This must be balanced with trying to avoid a situation whereby balances could be considered excessive, and will therefore be a key consideration when setting future revenue budgets and reviewing the medium-term financial plan. So at that point, colleagues, I'd just like to pause for any comments that Cabinet colleagues may wish to make on this report. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you very much, Leader. You probably know what I'm going to say anyway about the grant funding that we had from Welsh Government, but it's a welcome addition to this area. And I just have to thank the staff that have actually gone and found this funding, because I think we were either the only one or one of the only literary councils that applied for it. So I believe that from that, well done to the staff to actually get so much that we did, and much appreciation for that. And it does go a long way to the Eliminate agenda and for the work of the authority. So appreciation and thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Marshall. And it really is a very positive reflection on the contribution that our staff make and the confidence that Welsh Government has in the teams here in Newport. So thank you for that. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Leader. I just wish to speak about my education portfolio in relation to the use of reserves in relation to the 5.3 million. Essentially, much of that was grant funding that was given to our schools, the intention of spending on capital projects, and there was huge delay during the pandemic and post-pandemic in getting equipment, getting planning permission, getting things authorised, and we've seen that spend happen in the last year. However, that doesn't mean that we can't monitor closely and watch closely what schools are doing. They need to be prudent, they need to be careful, but it certainly is noted in relation to the reserves and how they've been spent. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much for that, Deputy Leader. Councillor Petruni.
There we go. Thank you, Leader. I just want to make 2 points. Overall, it's a more positive revenue, but I want to emphasise we can't be complacent. The overall, if you look at some of the additional pressures we've got on certain services, housing, for example, children's services, long-standing, long-term issues, there's no short-term fix. And my colleagues as said behind me, grant funding, it's grants. It's not ongoing necessarily. We have to fight for that every year, wherever the grant funding timetable is. So we have to be prudent, on the ball, never wavering from our agenda to transform and address the long-standing pressures, not only on this council, but every council across the country. And I want to emphasise that part. And I want to lastly emphasise, just to address the point it says overspend on pay budgets. Let's be clear. We have to put overspend because it's more than we projected. But we are proud to give our members some of the lowest paid up to 10%, if not 10%. On average, 6%. Inflation came out today, was it yesterday? Still 10.1%. Making people poorer every month, year on year so far. So I'm proud, we are proud, and I know the leader's proud, we're giving one of the best pay settlements to our staff.
Thank you so much for that, Councillor Petruni. And you are absolutely right. You speak on behalf of us all when you express our commitment to doing the absolute best that we can for all of those people who are such committed public servants here in Newport. So thank you so much for that. I really value your comments there. Thank you. Are there any further comments from colleagues on this?
Welcome to the O2 messaging service. The person you are calling is unable to take your call. Please leave your message after the tone. Will you record your message?
Shall we start again? Okay. So, thank you, colleagues, for your contributions there. And obviously, as we're nearing the end of the financial year, many of the significant areas of overspending are known with reasonable certainty, and so the values attributed are realistic. However, we need to be mindful that there is still the potential for the position to change. And although the service area position has improved following confirmed additional funding from Welsh Government, given the challenges that we are likely to see in future, there is still a need to reduce service overspending. As well as a focus on the in-year position, it will be important going forwards for our services to understand any longer-term impacts of the challenges being faced and identify strategies for minimising these impacts. And that really is exactly what Councillor Petruni was saying there. And we need to focus on how we transform our services for the future. We need to be mindful of not just the here and now, but the future as well. So, colleagues, we're asked to note the overall budget forecast position and agree that the Chief Executive and the Executive Board continue to review and challenge service area forecasts, to note the key risks identified throughout the report, particularly those risks that relate to homelessness and social care placements, to note the overall position in relation to schools and note the forecast movements in reserves, and approve allocation of the 21-22 underspend that remained unallocated at outturn as set out in section 4 of the report. Is somebody happy to move that? Thank you. Everyone content? Thank you very much for that, colleagues, and thank you for your contributions here today. Move then to item number 6 on our agenda today, which is the Capital Programme Monitoring and Additions Report. This is in pages 97 to 120 of your packs. Now, the purpose of this report is to provide an overview of the updated capital budgets for this financial year, alongside the projected outturn position as at the year end of March 2023. And this is the third capital monitoring report of the 22-23 financial year. The last report received by Cabinet was in October, and there have been several additions and amendments made to the programme since then. Now, most of these amendments relate to the addition of specific grant-funded schemes. These total £8.283 million and are detailed in Appendix A. They impact across multiple financial years, with £1.4 million added to 22-23. Now, we as a Cabinet are being asked to approve these additions to the programme. The total net impact of these additions and revisions are to increase the total budget for 22-23 to £89.8 million. Now, the projected outturn against the revised budget of £89.8 million, expenditure totaling £61.3 million is projected. This is a £28.5 million variance and is comprised of £27 million of slippage and £1.5 million of true net underspends and overspends. The level of slippage has increased by approximately £10 million since our last report, and this is largely due to delays and challenges across various schemes. Now, Cabinet, we're only being asked to note the current forecast slippage, not to approve slippage at this stage of the year. Instead, as we've seen in previous reports this year, slippage is being identified in every monitoring report, and only in the final report of the year will we be asked to approve a total amount to be transferred to future years. Now, the report also outlines the current position in relation to capital headroom, and this is made up of £57,000 of borrowing headroom, £258,000 of a capital expenditure reserve, including the potential commitment of £1.267 million for Band B and £1.474 million of uncommitted capital receipts. The balance of headroom available takes account of commitments already reflected within the capital programme, as well as provisional funding to take the Band B funding envelope to £90 million. This overall amount of headroom, which has steadily reduced over recent years, will need to be managed and monitored in order to ensure that it can be utilised for the most critical issues over the medium term. So we do need to monitor this carefully, colleagues. Therefore, opportunities to add one-off contributions to the headroom will also need to be taken, and when available, to ensure that we're able to react to emerging pressures and ensure that the full programme can be delivered. Once again, I'll pause at this point and invite contributions from colleagues. Would anybody like to speak on this particular item? Councillor Petruni.
Thank you, Leader. It's just to emphasise that we're still, even in tough times, investing in this city, investing in its services, investing in our schools. We budgeted for the coming year £39 million extra for our schools, delivering hopefully £33 million due to slippage in the coming year. And investing, we had set a budget for £18 million in economic regeneration to this city. You know, significant investments into this city, even in the dark times. So we're committed to the regeneration project and to our schools programme, and the money's there to prove it.
We are indeed. Thank you for that. Really appreciate that. Any further colleagues wish to comment on this item? Is somebody happy to move the report? Is everybody content with that? Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda, item number 7, is the final budget and mid-term financial plan, final proposals for 2023-2024. And all of the information that pertains to this item is included in pages 121 to 340 of the packs. So turning to this item, the report follows the one that we considered at our December meeting, which we approved as the basis for the public consultation on our draft budget proposals. The consultation has now concluded, and this report outlines the responses received to the consultation, changes in budgetary assumptions in the intervening period, and our final proposals for consideration today. It goes without saying that this is one of the most important reports of the year, and we really must give it careful consideration, especially when considering the financial context within which we and our residents are operating. So the report represents the culmination of an incredibly challenging period, which began with us considering the implications as we transitioned out of the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic. At the beginning of the last year, there was concern about the lasting impacts of the pandemic. And you will recall, colleagues, that we temporarily created a sizable COVID contingency to mitigate some of the uncertainties ahead of us. However, what has transpired has been quite different to what was expected, with high inflation representing the single biggest challenge facing the Council and the wider economy. This has resulted in pay awards being much higher than we and most other councils had anticipated, placing a significant in-year pressure on our finances, as well as a lasting one that is being addressed as part of this budget. As well as this, energy inflation is running at historic levels, and we are having to face the financial impact of this in our budgeting for next year. And it's not just the costs we incur ourselves. Our service providers are facing the same pressures, and those are ultimately being passed to us. Demand for services has been high, and we've seen a high number of significant pressures emerging. One example of this relates to homelessness services, where the continued high demand for temporary accommodation has placed an extraordinary financial pressure upon the Council. This draft budget addresses the current level of overspend to the tune of over £4 million and will allow us to continue supporting some of the most vulnerable people in our city. As a consequence of these pressures, our December budget report highlighted an unprecedented budget gap, and we outlined a number of strategies to address this gap, including a proposed council tax rise and savings from all services. In the meeting itself, we outlined a specific approach in relation to schools, whereby the Council would meet the cost of certain pressures, with schools themselves being asked to absorb others. The proposals set out within the report are those that formed the basis of consultation with the public that concluded earlier this month. It goes without saying, colleagues, that this has been an incredibly difficult process, and the decisions to consult on these proposals were not taken lightly. I'm therefore really pleased to see the high levels of responses and the high engagement rates with the residents of Newport and other stakeholders. I'm really pleased that they have responded within this consultation process. And this can be evidenced by the vast array of responses that we've received that you can see in your packs. The report highlights the different sources of consultation responses that we've received and represents a significant increase on previous years. Now, we know that this is aided in part by additional bus Wi-Fi responses, As well as this, several engagement exercises have been conducted, including a pre-budget survey, engagement with the Fairness Commission, engagement with the Youth Council, public consultation on events, and events with users directly affected by the proposals. Responses have also been received from trade unions, scrutiny committees, and the Schools Forum. I'd really like to say a huge thank you to everybody who's contributed and made comments, who's taken the time to give us feedback on the proposals. We really have looked at the comments that we've received and we've taken these into account. I particularly welcome the contributions from the Youth Council. And as always, my utmost and deepest thanks to our trade union sisters and brothers for coming forward and sharing with us their views on this. We are listening to what you've had to say to us. Appendices 1 to 4 provide the details of responses received, but I would like to highlight some of the key messages coming through. When looking at the outcome of the public consultation, it is clear that there is a degree of understanding of the situation decision makers within the Council face. A range of responses to specific proposals have been provided, particularly visible within the statistical analysis where a spread of views of certain proposals was evident. It's been really clear to us from this feedback what the views of the public are, and I really like to thank citizens for coming forward and again contributing to that. There's also within this clear support for some proposals, and again this provides Cabinet with assurance that we are reflecting the feeling of residents when making such proposals. Many of the qualitative comments made are pertinent, and as a listening council, we take these comments seriously and are committed to acting on those as and where possible. We really do understand that reducing services in areas such as social services is not going to be popular, as these are the services that safeguard some of our most vulnerable people. Our approach has been to avoid reductions to the most critical services and only propose to cease or reduce services where impact can be managed. However, difficult decisions are required, and we are looking to balance the impact across services as best as possible. In terms of council tax, it is clear to see that there is recognition that increases are unavoidable, and that increases in the rate of council tax can enable the most vital services to be protected. Once again, I'd like to reiterate that my assurance to the public and other stakeholders that we have taken the feedback on board and we have used this in determining our final proposals. It's also important to reflect on the way that we consult, and we can assure key stakeholders we'll continue to review the way in which we consult and the information that we include within our budget proposals to ensure that as many people as possible can fully engage in the process. I'd just like to move on to the changes in the budget position since December. Now, as you'll all be aware, in every year, the development of the budget is an ever-changing process, and there's been a number of key changes since we issued our draft proposals in December. The most significant of these, as announced in the Cabinet meeting itself, was the announcement of the draft Welsh Government settlement, which provides an additional £11.7 million of funding, over and above that already assumed. And we greatly appreciate the improved settlement that our Welsh Labour Government has given in recognition of the challenges that local authorities face. In addition, we've now incorporated the final draft contribution from schools, as well as a number of other positive changes to budgetary assumptions, such as reduced pressures in certain areas, new non-service savings, and the availability of specific grant funding to offset pressures that were previously assumed to fall upon the Council. Whilst these movements have provided welcome mitigation to a significant budget gap, there have invariably been some movements that have only added to the pressure, such as the need to increase the assumptions around future pay awards, as well as other emerging pressures in certain services. And the report lists these updated assumptions. The culmination of these movements is that a balance in hand of around £2.5 million now exists, and I will now detail how we intend to take that balance in hand and target that as effectively as possible, having taken into account the consultation feedback. It is absolutely clear from the feedback received that there is a strength of feeling towards the short breaks provision currently provided at both Oaklands and Spring Gardens. We recognise that vital services such as these, which support some of our most vulnerable people, need to be protected as much as possible. Because of this, I am able to announce that the proposal in relation to Oaklands will be withdrawn at a cost of £485,000. In terms of Spring Gardens, the proposal will be reduced by £300,000 on a permanent basis, so that some provision will continue, and as well as this, we are committing a one-off sum of £200,000 from reprioritised reserves for 2023-24 to provide capacity for further continued provision and give some time for a review of the service to be undertaken to move it to a more sustainable footing. Also, having carefully considered the feedback received, we have taken the decision to withdraw the proposal to introduce car parking charges at 4 countryside car parks. In addition, we're not going to introduce the charges for a replacement bin during 2023-24, having considered the impact that this will have on those residents struggling most with the cost of living crisis. The proposal will be reconsidered and reviewed. The cost of withdrawing these two proposals is £90,000. In relation to council tax, we have again listened to the views of Newport residents on our proposed 9.5% increase. We do understand the impact of an increase of this size and that it would be challenging for residents at this time. However, as I've already said in this meeting, the Council is facing the same cost pressures, and coupled with a comparatively low rate of council tax to other Welsh local authorities, we are in a really challenging position. Having said that, we are committed to doing what we can for our residents and are proposing to reduce the proposed increase in council tax to 8.5% to ensure that it is less than the current rate of inflation. For bands A to C, which are the most common in Newport, this equates to an increase of between £1.39 and £1.85 per week. This will still leave Newport with one of the lower council tax rates across Wales and the UK, and those residents who receive help with their council tax bills through the Council Tax Reduction Scheme will continue to do so, as we are fully funding that to keep up with this increase. And the Council has already adopted the Wales-wide scheme in this respect. Now, as a result of reducing the increase in council tax and withdrawing or reducing savings proposals just outlined, it reduces the balance in hand to £937,000. As a Cabinet, We believe that the best use of this residual amount is to reduce the requirement for schools to contribute to the budget gap. We do recognise that this still leaves schools with a challenge to face heading into 23-24. And to assist with this challenge, we're committing to using almost £1.9 million of repurposed earmarked reserves to target financial support for those schools who need it the most. Taking this into account, it does mean that we are committing £9 million towards the pressures being faced by schools in 23-24. In addition to using repurposed reserves to support spring gardens and schools, we also intend to provide temporary support to growing space for the next 2 years and provide temporary support to the EAS to enable a partial deferral on the proposed saving on our annual contribution. Again, these savings will allow for service reviews and changes to take place, which will provide a better and more sustainable service to go forward, some of which support our most vulnerable people. As well as this, £150,000 of existing reserves will be used so that changes to our services for people with a learning disability can be reviewed and tapered over the coming year. Furthermore, for Kutch and the Barnardo's Partnership, officers have worked to remodel the service using radical reform grant funding. The current staff and their experience and skills will be part of this remodelling. This means, in effect, that the savings proposal will be delayed by 2 years. Repurposed reserves will also provide one-off further investment in the city centre to ensure that we support and sustain the recovery of the city centre coming out of the pandemic. This will include the council's support on business rates for those eligible businesses in the city centre, alongside the Welsh Government Rate Support Scheme. And what this means is that businesses who are eligible for both schemes will have no business rates to pay. By allocating the balance in hand, it means we're now proposing a balanced budget for 23-24 as per our legislative requirement. This has been achieved without the general use of earmarked reserves to balance the budget. This is because the use of the repurposed reserves will either be for one-off uses or to provide 1 to 2 years support so that services can be reviewed and changed to both make savings in the future and be more sustainable while providing a better service and outcome than would otherwise be the case. Some may question this approach, particularly considering some of the difficult savings that have been put forward. However, we are a responsible council that takes financial management very seriously. Further use of reserves would have been an easy option and would only store up problems for the next year and beyond. We'd still have to ultimately make the same level of savings, plus we would then have to replenish any reserves used. Therefore, we feel that for this year it is right to act responsibly and ensure a sustainable financial footing for this council. Whilst the process of developing a budget for 23-24 has been incredibly challenging, unfortunately the outlook for the medium term does not look any easier. And Appendix 7 to the report highlights a potential budget gap of £15 million in 24-25 and a further £12 million in 25-26. Now, whilst these are lower than the initial gap, there does remain a significant amount of uncertainty, both in terms of ongoing inflationary pressure and demand for services, as well as the funding to be received from central government. Although Welsh Government have provided an indicative settlement for 24-25, this is ultimately dependent upon the settlement that they receive from the UK Government, which we all know is subject to change. Therefore, there is a possibility that the medium-term gap could be worse than modelled. Plus, it comes against the backdrop of the challenging decisions that have already been taken. Moving forwards, colleagues, it really is highly likely that further challenging decisions around council tax and savings will be needed for the future. To address this, as we've already heard in this meeting, it will be an absolute necessity for the Council to continue to reflect on the way that it operates and seek ways to deliver services differently. Services do need to be transformed to deliver better experiences for citizens and service users on a lower cost base. We need to look at things differently and ensure that we have a modernised, sustainable council fit for the 21st century going forwards. Now, at that point, colleagues, I'd just like to pause and invite contributions. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Leader. Can I please share your thanks to every resident who has participated in the consultation process? Can I also please thank the officers, because they've all worked incredibly hard to support and advise us as we've gone through this whole process. It was particularly helpful to join the leader and meet with some of our union representatives and head teachers, and we did have a very constructive conversation, and it was recognised that we're in unprecedented times, and that meant difficult decisions have had to be taken. But I hope, reviewing the conversation and the points the leaders made today, that you would agree that we have listened carefully. The Fairness Commission's preamble acknowledges that we're in a time of severe challenges to local authority finances. Funding to local authorities, which includes ourselves, has been severely impacted due to the knock-on effects of Brexit, which has left us with an economy that has reduced by 5.5%, as new border controls have disrupted commerce and the supply of labour. A consequence of a referendum predicated on lies and misinformation. Indeed, this weekend we've been informed that national government cross-party discussions are now underway to find ways of impacting and reducing this impact. Additionally, the global pandemic has an impact, but was inherently made worse in the UK by the £6 billion spent on useless PPE, contracts given to Tory mates and chums. We have additionally seen the impact of the war in Ukraine and the consequent rising fuel costs. And finally, a mini-budget that proposed tax cuts for the rich and crashed the economy with consequent mortgage rises that homeowners have had to endure. And of course, the rise in inflation that has impacted on all of us and of course, obviously, this local authority. The autumn budget statement was made against a backdrop of financial mess created by a government that lurches from one scandal to the next. Devastatingly, we know that funding will not improve next year, and then to balance the books, the politics of austerity are to be reintroduced, with direct cuts being made to public services. This is a government whose guiding principles are liberty, democracy and the rule of law, but not fairness and equality. I checked this because I wanted to understand if a Tory recognises the concept of fairness, equality and care for those that are most in need. And disappointingly, these values were not listed on the Conservative Party website. And I think this gives us an insight into why we have this financial mess and the consequences being passed on to us, the local authority, to deal with. The Fairness Commission have tried to apply the principles of fairness and equality to a budget which was never our intention or expectation to deliver. It's a budget that's been foisted upon us by a government who do not share the values and beliefs which are intrinsic to what we do. We are doing our best to set a balanced budget, a legal requirement, while finding a £17 million in savings, and we're doing our best in a horrendous situation. None of this has been easy. We've all had sleepless nights, and there have been constant review and scrutiny to try and reduce the impact of what we've been having to do. Finally, we have actually proposed a council tax increase, and this was never an easy decision to take. But it has to be remembered that Newport, we have one of the lowest council tax bases in the whole of Wales and, of course, as well the UK. In full council recently, we unanimously agreed that the council tax reduction scheme, that there was funding there would ensure that there be either a reduction or exemption for council tax payments for those who are most in need. And those are those who live alone, students, carers, care leavers, and those with a disability. And those actually living in a granny annex, they're equally entitled to a reduction in council tax, and particularly for those who are on a low income. Applicants are assessed on income, and the proportion of that would need to be spent, and the proportion of that would need to be spent on council tax. Therefore, the higher the council tax, the more likely the entitlement. This has actually led to the situation where if you live in Cardiff and have a similar income and are living in a property of the same banding, you're more likely to be entitled to reduction. This is an argument, actually, firstly, to support the rise in council tax that we will see, because it actually mean greater entitlement to those who are most in need. In the budget paper, which was previous to this paper, you will actually see there was a 97k underspend of this allocated budget. With a council tax increase, a positive outcome would be to make note that this reduction would actually be spent, this underspend would be spent appropriately, and our residents would be best supported. Finally, turning to education, it's really welcome to see the additional 937,000 being given to support our schools, and specifically being focused on those who are most vulnerable and greatest in need. And this is in addition to the support that's already going to be on the money that's already been spent on our schools. I can assure you, with careful scrutiny and support, our schools will hopefully balance their budgets this year. Thank you. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much for that, Deputy Leader. Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Leader. Again, following on from the Deputy and yourself, we've done the right thing. For the residents that were phoning me, really upset over Oaklands, understandably, my advice was fill out the consultation. They've done that in their droves, and I'm really, really pleased that they have, because that gave you a voice so we could hear you, and we've been listening. It's not a fix-all, it's not. But how can you fix everything when central government already has taken £90 million from this council? That's what we're facing, 90 million plus whatever's coming down the line. Welsh Government can do so much, but they're also reliant on UK Government. So let's make sure we point the finger in the right place, if that is the right terminology. This is not of our making. We're just here, in opposition, cleaning up their mess. And that's all we ever do, is clean up their mess. They don't like it, I don't really care. When it comes to children and children's services and the vulnerable, you are damn straight we are going to stand up front and centre and protect them as best we can. And by doing that, we have to go 3 weekly bins, increase council tax. One gentleman who was in tears over Oaklands actually said to me, I will pay 15% on my council tax and I will go 4 weekly bins, but please leave Oaklands open. That man, I was hoping he'd be here today. I don't know whether he is. I'm really, really glad that he filled out the consultation. But it was the way that the residents and the people that contacted me, they understood. They understood the pressures we're under. This wasn't a beating with a stick. This was the residents fully understanding, and all they're asking for is a day or two a month. And my argument to all the other residents that may not have supported it, well, maybe you walk a mile in their shoes and you will understand why we do what we do. Thank you, Leader.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Leader. So as we know, and my colleagues will say this over and over again, I'm sure, that the autumn settlement by Westminster was just not sufficient enough to address the impact of inflation to meet the pressures that we faced. So the 3-year settlement, being almost £3 billion less in real terms than the funding when the funding was announced in 2021. This settlement for me was a choice to impose another 3 years of austerity on the devolved countries. And the problems are the same in England as well. The local authorities there are struggling, just the same as we are in Wales. The impact has forced local services to contract. It has placed immense pressure on social care and its statutory services, and we potentially face, like many other authorities, losing some services altogether. And that's the situation we were in only a few months ago. So during the consultation period, Leader, we met with some key services that face the hardest of potential outcomes. And I'd like to really take this opportunity to thank all those people that contributed to that consultation period, especially those under my own portfolio in Spring Gardens and Growing Spaces, where their contributions, I think, made a significant effort to the results that we're talking about today. I'd also like to thank the staff involved in social services. They found it a particularly difficult period, I think, quite rightly. So I'd like to thank the senior management team in social services and the social workers that have supported us in coming to these decisions today. Importantly, I think as well, the individuals who contributed, who are residents in Newport. I know my colleague will say a bit more about the people that we met in Oaklands, but they did actually have a real impact on ourselves emotionally as well, listening to their stories, and I think they have made a difference, and I think it's all credit to them that they did take the time. And it shows that there is a value to consultation in Newport and that we do listen. So our focus throughout has been, as you know, on protecting those most vulnerable in our city, on our statutory services, and I'm pleased that we've been able to protect those projects, I think, that mean so much as it came out in consultation to the people in our city. What I will say about the future, that obviously there are going to be difficult times, as you mentioned, but this gives us time, I think, to rebuild, to look at transforming our services and to actually make them more resilient to what's happening in Westminster. And I think that will be the focus of certainly our work in social care moving forward. It's to protect those services from any more catastrophes and crises that happen in Westminster. And that will be a priority for our social care teams. Of course, there will be challenges ahead, but unlike our Westminster government, we've done all we can to ensure that this city is safe and functioning in relation to its social care services. And I wonder now, you know, as the media will pick up on this and as the surely opposition members will be posting now, will they be posting what the increases in community charge are now, or will they be posting that Spring Gardens and Growing Spaces and Oaklands have been saved? Because that's the difference. The difference is that those council charges are not what we want to do. They're below inflation, and I think everybody should acknowledge that. But there'll be little mention, I think, that we've actually saved some of these key services in Newport, and we will rebuild them into stronger and better and more resilient. But that's the priority, and that's the difference between the two parties for me, is that one is committed to social care and education, and the other is committed to something entirely different. So that's where we stand now. Thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hughes. Thank you. Councillor Lacey.
Thank you, Leader. I welcome the revised budget given to us today. It shows that we've taken into account the results of the public consultation, especially with regard to Spring Gardens in Oakland. We must remember that this is not a situation of our making. This situation is an accumulation of 12 years of austerity, out-of-control energy costs and an even more out-of-control government in Westminster. 6 million wasted on PPE, and I could go on. We are a Labour-led council, and our socialist principles are the foundation of our manifesto and therefore our corporate plan. It is right that with the additional revenue, it's used on social services and education. 8.5% council tax is in real terms £1.85 per week on a Band C property, £96.20 a year. In comparison, some English local authorities who are increasing by 5% have a real term increase of £100 and over. This shows how low we are as a local authority. But also, as the Deputy Leader has already mentioned, an increase on the base will allow residents who can't afford the council tax to become eligible for the council tax reduction scheme. To finish, I just want to say that we are a listening council. and we listen to our residents with the most vulnerable at heart. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lacey. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, most certainly this year has been really, really challenging in setting the budget, especially, as my colleague has mentioned, taking into consideration the portfolio that we hold, within social services. But let's be under no illusion. The summer budget was, one of the reasons why we've, in this situation, with thanks to some of the support from Welsh Government, but still, obviously, we're in that predicament to try and support our residents where we can. But to set this budget, it was warming to see the collective work trying to protect education and social services within that. And, we're doing that as much as we can. We have listened. I know that's been said already within the Chamber. We've listened to residents. We've listened to the Oakland's parents and staff. We've listened, to various scrutiny committees. I've sat down and watched YouTube, on the committees to make sure I'm getting everything, everything that's said to make sure that I can, be here today and make that decision making. It's just... some of it is heartening, but it also allows us to, during that process, allows us to move forward. There were some really, really good suggestions put forward by residents, by Oakland parents, by others, by staff, and about how we move forward. So I know the word transformation was mentioned, and it is something that we'll look forward to, hopefully, and maintaining services. But how can we make it better? And listening, it's always about listening, not just, through the process, but for everyone being to provide a good service. So I am deeply thankful for the kind of words that the Oakland's parents had to us, myself and Jace, as part of the proposal, because, it is quite emotional, but they were true, and they kind of told us their story in a way that we could get. And it was no anger, animosity. It was just basically, this is what the situation is. And I really appreciate that, and it was very much heart to heart. But we listened. We did listen on that side. And I'm very, very deeply grateful along that. But also, to put out the arm of working forward in the future with each other as well. So to conclude, I'd like to say my appreciation to all involved again, and that is the staff, the officers, the management teams, all as part of that, compared to where we first picked up the paperwork thinking, oh my Lord, where are we going with this? But to where we are now, it is in a better position. It's a fairer position that actually puts education and social services at the heart of what we're doing. So thank you, Leader.
Thank you for that, Councillor Marshall. Thank you. Any further contributions? Councillor Forsey.
Thank you, Leader. The range of budget proposals is extremely wide, probably the widest range ever. The decision... Sorry, can't quite see that. The decision... I'm going to have to put my glasses on. Apologies. The decisions made to produce this budget has been very difficult, but I think they are logical and caring. If you try to compare the proposal to reduce the opening hours at Oakland's Care Centre and the proposal to reduce the frequency of the residual bin collection, well, for me, there is no comparison. One is a care centre for children with needs, and the other asks everybody to recycle. This involves behaviour change, and I know some people find this difficult. The range of items collected from the curbside is extensive. Food, plastic, glass, tin, paper, cardboard, garden waste. If you recycle everything, which you can, then there is little left to be collected from the residual bin. The pandemic led to an increase in online shopping, which led to an increase in cardboard. This increased volume of cardboard has been maintained, and in order to accommodate this, the size of the bags will be increased. Most councils are reducing the frequency of residual bin collections, and in fact it would be remiss of us not to be moving in the same direction. We have to meet our recycling targets, and we are on a journey to zero waste. You can't keep saying, I get climate change, and then carrying on just the same. If you understand climate change, then it means you understand the need to live differently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Forsey, and I'm sure that we all support your comments there. Thank you very much for that. Any further comments from Cabinet colleagues on this item? Oh, okay. Oh. Councillor Petruni.
Thank you, Leader. I wasn't going to speak because I didn't want to repeat anything, but I just wanted to amend what Councillor Hughes says, if you will allow me. Because what I would also say the Labour Party, and particularly in this council, have proved and have taken the close from is financial prudence. We have taken it from the Conservatives. You blew it in the budget. Totally blew it on the budget. And you know why we've taken a financial prudence approach and making sure this is a budget fit for purpose while taking the tough decisions, and we'll get criticised, and that's your job. Absolutely. And the people who disagree with us, we'll take it shoulder to shoulder, all of us, the entire Labour group. Because you know who pays the price when the budget isn't level and pays for everything? The poorest. The poorest, the most vulnerable, always pay the price when you get the economics wrong. You get the economics wrong, the bottom always pay. And we will never let that happen. So you bring it on, and you'll see how strong we are together to make the tough decisions to protect those people who deserve it the most.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Petruni. Thank you. I'm sure we all share those views. So then, colleagues, as I've said, and how colleagues, Cabinet colleagues, have also said, this has been a really difficult process this year. And I'd like to place on record my thanks to my Cabinet colleagues and to our officers who've worked tirelessly to ensure that we're able to propose the balanced budget before us today. The Deputy Leader mentioned how this has been weighing heavily on our minds for quite some time now, and she used the term sleepless nights. I'd just like to be really clear that that is not just something that applies to Cabinet alone. I know and I understand that across our officers as well, that has also been the case. And I really do thank you all for the hard work and effort that you have put into getting us to this point. We've listened to the public, but you've listened to us. And I really thank you for that. And I do believe that, given the circumstances, this is a fair budget, it's a sustainable budget, and a responsible budget, where we, within the most challenging context, have listened to what matters most to our residents, and in doing so, we have prioritised our most vulnerable residents. The recommendations set out in the report require us as a Cabinet to approve the detail of this budget and the medium-term financial plan, including the budget proposals that underpin them. We're asked to approve the fees and charges for 2023-24 and the intended use of reserves, including, as we've discussed, the repurposing of certain reserves. We're asked to note the risks and uncertainties, the responses to the formal consultation, and the fairness and equalities impact assessments on the budget proposals. As you are aware, colleagues, only full council can approve the overall rate of council tax for 23-24. And we, as a Cabinet, are also asked to recommend an overall net budget and resulting council tax for approval at the council meeting on the 28th of February. So, thank you. Is everyone content with this? Thank you, all colleagues, for your contributions to the debate on this today, but also thank you for the hard work and commitment you've demonstrated to this process during this period. Thanks. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to pause at this point to allow any interested parties that might wish to leave the chamber to make their way out without disrupting the next item. Okay, shall we continue? The final item on our agenda today is the external pressures, the cost of living report. This is on page 341 to 346 of the packs. And for those colleagues who are present today, this is a regular update that the Cabinet receives, and it highlights the external pressures and the impact that they're having on our Newport City Council services, and summarises the actions that we're taking with our local partners. Now, this monthly report provides an overview of the current wider economic impact in the UK and Wales since the last report was presented to our Cabinet in January. For many of our residents, this is one of the most difficult periods that they've experienced, and we continue to do all that we can in collaboration with our key partners across the city. We do recognise what a challenging time this is for our residents, and with these pressures continuing, I urge all residents who are experiencing difficulty to contact the Council for information on the advice and support that's available to help you with your household bills and other financial obligations. During times such as these, our ability to work in partnership to support our residents, businesses and staff is of utmost importance. The commitment of our officers and our partners to work together to help make a difference and support people to access help, advice and support is clear in all of the conversations that I hold internally, locally and nationally, both as in my role as the leader of the Council and the chair of our One Newport partnership. This isn't just an issue for us in Newport, it's being felt across the whole of Wales. And I continue to raise the need for support at every opportunity and ensure we as a council support our local and Welsh Government initiatives to maximise the support that we and our partners are able to provide. With the media reporting that charities are seeing an estimated 30% increase in those accessing food banks, we continue to work in partnership with Gavro to provide assistance to food banks across the cities. The report also outlines how our schools are maximising the funding and support that they can access to provide our children and young people and their families with help in this time of great need. During the cold weather spells, we're encouraging residents to access our warm spaces across the city where they can stay warm and access advice on sources of support and advice. And as a city with a long history of welcoming people seeking sanctuary, offering a place of safety for those fleeing conflict and persecution, we continue to support refugees to find accommodation and access support. I'm just going to pause at that point, colleagues, and just invite any contributions. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Leader. Focusing on education, next week we're actually moving into half term, and we need to turn to Welsh Government and thank them again for the voucher scheme, the free school meal voucher scheme that will ensure that our children will get fed through next week, because it's difficult for families who are on low incomes. They've got to focus next week on it's going to be childcare provision for those people in employment on low wages. It's going to be ensuring there's hot meals that are on the table, and that voucher scheme that is continued to be administered by the Welsh Government is really, really welcome and makes a massive, massive difference. I think we also need to focus on the fact that from next summer, in our primary schools, already foundation phase, every child is entitled to free school meals, and that's going to be rolled out from September to our junior classes and junior children, and that is incredibly welcome in these difficult times. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much for that, Deputy Leader, and there's excellent examples there of all the really positive work that's going on with some of our most vulnerable children across the city. Thank you for that. Councillor Lacey.
Thank you, Leader. You mentioned about Gavo and the food banks, and I just wanted to say thank you to Raven House and the other food banks in the city. I've taken lead from my colleague who has been, for the last few weeks advertising food banks and food parcels to her ward, and there was some uptake through into my ward as well, so we've decided to do the same. Last week I had 20, this week I've got another 8. And between us both, I think we're covering about 50 parcels a week. But not only are we covering parcels in our own wards, we're actually taking resident wards who are not Labour, don't have Labour councillors, and it just proves that how many people are out there in need. And I just want to say that if you have need and you're not in your ward and you don't have Labour councillors to look after you, then please just still come to us, because we will still be there to help. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lacey, and sterling voluntary work being undertaken there. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to take the opportunity, if I could. This morning I spent some time in one of those centres that do help people in their communities. So it was the Iska Haven in Killeen. And that project ended today. It was meant as a short-term winter project. And hopefully now, as the weather starts to improve, then that project itself will come to an end. But I wanted to take the opportunity to thank the 18 volunteers in the end that came there from October and gave up every Wednesday and every Saturday until this morning, just for their efforts. They helped over 50 people with direct advice on finance and energy issues in particular, and as you can imagine, some of the food issues. And then pushing on from that, I'd just like to thank a relatively new agency that set up a group of volunteers in Killeen called the Kindness Exchange, who are distributing food that's past sell-by date in the local community, and donations that are given from the public. And also, just to remind people, even though the weather's getting better, the issues aren't getting better for many of our people in the city. And as Councillor Lacey's just said, that, you know, as a trustee really of Ravenshouse Trust, demand has never been greater for us. So if there are people or agencies in Newport that can support that food bank and others in the city, I'd please encourage them to come forward and support us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hughes. Thank you. Councillor Forsey.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to mention the B word. So that's not Finn at the moment, but it is Brexit. Recent estimates have calculated that Brexit has made all households across this country £1,000 a year poorer. This makes us less able to cope with the cost of living crisis, whether this is heating costs or food costs. We are having an increased need for warm spaces and food banks because of Brexit, which is a very sad situation. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councillor Forsey, absolutely. Any further contributions there? I'd just like to pause there, actually, and say a huge thank you, because for anybody who's anybody watching back this council meeting today, you've seen really a really strong, powerful illustration of the role of a councillor. So here we are in the chamber today making absolutely critically important decisions with regard to the services that we deliver to our citizens across the city. And we've also heard some outstanding examples of the role of the ward councillor and what actually happens in the ward where councillors give up their time to volunteer and support our communities. I'd really like to say a huge thank you to you as a Cabinet and to our Labour Group councillors for the work that they do around that, and of course to other councillors within Newport too. But it really is a wide-ranging role, and we take all of our responsibilities within that very seriously, so thank you all for that. In conclusion then, thank you for considering this report, and I really appreciate your contributions to this. Now, item number 9, as always, is the work programme on pages 347 to 354 of the packs. Are you content to accept the updated programme? Thank you all, colleagues. Then that brings us to the close of this meeting today. And once again, thank you for your really considered contributions to our discussions this evening. Thank you all.